Hey guys, I hope you guys are doing great and wonderful on this day. I'm here bringing you guys a video that's a little bit different than the videos that I usually create here on my channel. I usually just do devlogs and all of that, but I wanted to change it a little bit. It's been a while that I've been working on Godot. Let's check. So I've been working on Godot for about 7 months. This is when I started this new game that I'm working on, which I'm still currently working on my indie game. And it's been about 7 months already. That's crazy how time flies, guys. Time flies like it's insane. And I just wanted to give you guys my thoughts and what I've learned about using Godot. And like I've used Unity, I've used Unreal, and I've used Godot. I never used Godot before I started working on my recent indie game. I just jumped into it and just wanted to see how different it was going to be, and I wanted to share you guys what I've learned while jumping into Godot. And not just Godot by itself, but it's also using C++ on it. I'm using the GDExtension. That's how I've been rocking Godot. I'm most likely going to be talking about 2D. I haven't tried 3D here in Godot just yet, and be able to tell you guys my experience on how I dealt with things and how I'm doing things for this game project that I'm working on. And maybe you'll be able to learn something from here and get something out of it. Feel free to like and subscribe on my channel and hit that bell notification as well. It definitely helps me out and lets me know that you guys are interested in these types of videos, and it does help me out with the algorithm. So I still don't know exactly how this video is going to go because I haven't not scripted it in any way, and it's just going to come out of my brain and into the video. So that's how it's gonna go right now, guys. Let's see how it goes. Hopefully it ends up being good, and I'm just gonna share you my thoughts and first impressions, and if Godot is actually a good engine to use or not. So let's get started. The first thing that I like about Godot is that it's open source, right? You can contribute to the project and help other people as well if you want. One thing I do love about it is that it's not loaded game engine compared to Unity or Unreal. So I wanted to show you guys how crazy and small Godot is, and it's actually pretty awesome how easy it is to download and get started on it, right? So I already started downloading it. It's on top of here, and it's about 55 megabytes. That's crazy. I just downloaded it like how many minutes ago? 8 minutes ago. So 55 megabytes. And this is the latest 4.3, which is the latest. I'm pretty sure they have beta and actually it's a little bit higher, like 4.4, maybe 4.5. I'm not entirely sure. I usually always get the latest release projects that are not in beta and all of that, but it's 55 megabytes. That's insanely awesome. And now when you want to compare it to Unity, let me bring my Unity hub over here. Let's say I wanted to install an editor right now, and they have the latest Unity 6 here. It's just in an LTS right now, which is technically that's what I would download right now if I had Unity 6. So let's press install, and as you notice, it's already 7.28 gigabytes. 7.28 gigabytes. That's an insane amount of gigabyte memory here, and that's not even including all the stuff that I want here, right? So if I wanted to make build for Android, that's an additional almost a little over 3 gigabytes right there. If I also wanted to include iOS on top of that, that's an additional gigabyte right there. Let's see what else is in here. If I wanted to build on Mac, that's an additional almost 2 gigabytes on top of that. If I wanted to build for WebGL, that's an additional 4 gigabytes on that. That's insane, guys. And if I want to build for PC, that's an additional 1.39 gigabytes. That's 20 gigabytes in here. That is an insane amount of memory in here, and that's what I like about Godot. The next thing that I wanted to talk to you guys about is going to be nodes and how that works in Godot compared to Unity and Unreal. In Unity, you have the scene that has all of these game objects here on the side in your hierarchy, and each of these game objects is composed of components. They have a whole bunch of components on the side, and even if it's just a simple empty component, just like this one right here that I have highlighted, it will always have a transform on them. You cannot remove this at all. So even if it's just an empty game object, it still contains a transform. And components here may form dependencies on each other. So if I were to go to the game manager on top of it there and click it, you can see all of the components that this game object has attached to it. It has a whole bunch of them in here, and you keep adding here. I'm not entirely sure if there's a limit, but you can keep adding multiple components in here. And basically that's how the scene is comprised here in Unity. And in Unreal, they have levels, and these levels are composed by actors. So all of this stuff here in my hierarchy are actors that are here in the level, and each of these actors are composed of UActor components. So if I were to go to one of my actors such as one of the characters that I have here. This is the layout and the hierarchy of how actors will look like. So you have the main topmost blueprint on top, and then you have root. Have to have a root component on top, and everything, any other components need to be children of the main roots of this actor. So all of these are components, but there's two different types. There are scene components, and scene components are the ones that are in here that they have transforms on them, and scene components inherits from U actor components. And I keep saying U actor components, but it should be actor components. I'm just used to how classes are called here in Unreal. Every class has to be prefixed by a letter U. Scene components will go here, and any non-scene components that only inherit actor component are going to be down here below it. These don't have any transforms on them. They don't have anything. The layout here is very similar to Godot, but not entirely. So that's very similar to Godot. And in Godot, you have scenes similar to how it's called in Unity, but it's a little bit different. Nodes don't necessarily have to have a location. So you may have some nodes that were, let's say if I were to attach just a node here, this one doesn't have any transform on the side, and each of these nodes can have a single script on them, but you can't have multiple scripts on a single node. And if I were to go into one of the players that I have here, in here you can see all the nodes that is comprised to make up this player that I have on top, and you cannot have multiple components on the side for them except for one script that you may be able to attach to it if you want. It's not necessary to have a script attached to it, and that's about it. It's not very complicated, and it's very simple. So every time you play the game, you'll be able to see how the nodes are structured here. If you were to run the game and you look at and go into remote, you can see all of this stuff that's happening here. You have a root, and you will have a main scene, which is, for me, is the splash screen. So if I were to show you guys the game, this is the splash screen, right? So this scene down here is what is comprised to make that splash screen. But this other stuff that I hear are actually your globals that you can be having in your game, and I'll be talking about globals later on in this video, so just keep watching if you don't know what globals are. And this is what you basically where your scene is derived. So let me make this a little bit smaller. Let me move this to the side, and as I'm changing scene transitions, you will see that this is going to get removed and replaced by a new scene, and that's how easy it is going to be for you transition into a new scene. So now it got removed and it got changed to a level scene here, and that's basically what I have about nodes here in Godot. I just wanted to bring this up to you guys so you guys know what's happening with me. When you're using Godot and you're using the GDExtension C++, you'll need to download and clone the repo or the Godot CPP, which is CPP is C++, right? So you need to download that C++ engine and clone it into your repository where your project is going to be at. So you clone it, and additionally, the first time I did it, I cloned the branch 4.2, which is the version number of Godot that I was using. When I wanted to upgrade my project to 4.3, all I needed was to check out 4.3 branch, right? And when I did that, it downloaded all the stuff that I needed, the updates and all the files, but there was one thing that it did not work correctly, and then that was this files here that for whatever reason it didn't download correctly or update it correctly when I changed my branch. And I don't think he detected it at all. It took me a while to realize this was the issue, just because I didn't know about it. And then when I looked into this extension underscore API.json file, even though the project branch was 4.3, this extension API JSON file had 4.2 here for whatever reason. So the easy fix here was just to delete the entire repo and re-clone it again, and that ended up making it work for me pretty fast. I wish I knew about that ahead of time, but just for you guys who are just starting and probably encountering this issue, if at all, maybe it's just me, you know. Maybe it was just me, guys, but just in case, you know, I just wanted to give you guys a heads up and let you guys know, and everything should be working as it should. So that's about that. All right, so the next thing that I wanted to talk about, it's going to be how globals work in here in Godot. So global singletons and all of that. So if I were to go into my project settings and go to globals, you can actually see all the global script that I have here enabled my project. And what globals basically mean here, they're basically just singletons. So if you ever use singletons in your projects, you know what singletons are. So if there is an object here, a class, so any global GD scripts that I have initialized there, I can call it anywhere in my other GD scripts at any time without needing it, because it's a singleton and it's going to exist for the entire lifetime of your game. And what's cool about here when it comes to C++, you can actually do something similar. There's two different ways that you can do it. If I went to my register types, and this is basically what you're using, this register underscore types.cpp. This is where you will initialize all your classes that you create in your C++. This is where you will initialize all those classes so that Godot knows about it when you build it. And there's two different ways to write it. Right, so I'm gonna tell you one of them, which is just similar to how GDScripts work. The Godot C++ project provide a macro called register singleton, and you can initialize your singleton here if you want it to always exist and all of that. Same thing with my inventory and my resource manager. But with these instances of these classes, you will not be able to call it anywhere in GDScript at all at any time. You will not be able to do that. This will only work on your C++ side. You also got to make sure you also register it so that Godot knows about these classes. So just keep that in mind if you were to register it that way. You're just using singletons. Otherwise, if you want it to actually work both ways, where you just want to be able to do it in C++, but also you want to call it in GDScript, instead of registering as a singleton here, you register normally like the others, build the project, create a scene, and this top node will need to be the type of that instance of the class you want to be global, and you will save it. And what's cool about this globals here in project settings is that it doesn't only need to be GD scripts, but it also can be scenes. So as you can see here on my UI manager, and basically what you would do is you will create a script attached to this, and here you can interact with your C++ class by calling the call functions, and be able to call that function that's inside your C++ class, and be able to interact with your UI manager. And these functions you can then call anywhere in your scripts, in your GD script. So that's one way to make it work both ways. So that's what I wanted to talk to you guys about, globals and singletons and how it works and how I'm doing it. The next thing that I wanted to tackle and just bring it up to you guys is the performance when it comes to just doing GDScript versus that same logic in C++. I had this happen to me, and I just wanted to, and I mentioned it in one of my devlogs when I was working on it. It was recently working on procedural generation when building the world that I was doing in my indie game. And initially I started with GDScript because I just wanted to make it work first, and then after making it work, I was going to transfer it to C++. That was the plan when I was working on this generation. And when it came to GDScript, I had to use threads and all of that to make it work a little bit fast, so you could calculate all of this stuff for all the different neighboring cells that you were doing. So I was building the generation in chunks, and be able to do that every time you switch to a new chunk, you have to regenerate the new chunks that were coming in and remove the old ones and all of that, and be able to do that pretty quickly. And so I had to do that with threads when it came to GDScript. And not only that, I also had to deal with set cells terrain connect function when it comes to either tile maps, or if you're in the latest 4.3 version is tile map layers. If you're doing auto tiling in your tile map, you're basically an array of cells that will tell it what exactly it's going to be in those cells, and terrain connect will actually start auto tiling those cells for you. This function here, it is crazy slow. Performance hit on this is insane. You can notice the hiccups and the hits when it happens when you transition into a new chunk and you call in this function to do the auto tiling. So that was another thing to keep in mind. There's not really much you can do about it, unless the only thing you can do is just not use it, and you create your own logic for that, right? So besides that, I made it work with GDScript with my procedural generation, and it was time to move it over to C++. And once I moved it to C++, it was so much faster. Actually, right now, I'm not even using threads at all in C++ because I didn't think it needed it. So right now, I still have to do additional testing when it comes to mobile and see if it actually needs threads or not, or offload it somewhere else, right? But I do have the logic there in case I want to transition it into threads, so it is there already. All I have to do is turn it on. The other thing is the same function that I mentioned earlier, the set cells terrain connect, when it comes to generating my cliffs and auto tiling it. It still does a little bit of hiccups, but it is not too noticeable. But you can still notice it as you transition into new chunks. So I may have to just change this later on once I have updated my art style for my indie game, and be able to create that logic myself instead, because it's still kind of noticeable. But it's basically about it for performance. Right. So the next thing I wanted to jump on is how to export variables here in C++ into the inspector. Yeah, so it's super easy when it comes to GDScript where you want to export a variable into the inspector in the editor. All you have to do was just put an at export and then the variable goes after, right? And that's it. But when it comes to C++, it's a little bit more hectic and kind of crazy. So what I did was to create a macro for it. I know I shouldn't be using macros at all when it comes to C++ because it makes it difficult when it comes to debugging. But I felt like when it came to exporting variables, it was okay to do it just because I'm just exporting variables and they're just getters and setter functions that you need to create for those variables. So I thought it was okay. I didn't want to do this for every variable that I wanted to export. It kind of gets hectic in there. So I just created a macro for it, right? To get a getter and a setter function and the name of the variable. If it's a ref, otherwise if it doesn't need a reference, then it's just all of that. And all I need to do is just one line of code in the bind method function. You also need to add the property in here, and basically it requires you to add these 3 lines of code to the project, right? So every export variable that you want to use, you want to call these 3 lines of code for every export function variable that you want to use. So you need to set it up so that way Godot is able to bind those getter and setter functions correctly and be able to add that property for the inspector. So you need to do this 3 times per variable that you want to export. So I'm doing that for every variable I'm exporting, and basically how I'm exporting variables here in C++. Another thing that I wanted to mention here is something cool that the editor does. It does it in Unity as well. So you may already know this, and if you don't, I've known people who doesn't know this at all. Sometimes you're able to, let's say you wanted to copy your variable or a property here into another node or whatever. It's easy as right clicking that variable and just copying the value, and you're able to go to another node and be able to paste that value in here, and it will replace it to that new value. So that's simple, right? So, but did you know you can also do math into the properties in here? So let's say I wanted to divide this by 2, it will clearly do so, and it's now divided by 2, and I can multiply it back by 2 and it will come back. It'll be where it was at right here. So if you ever wanted to do math in here, you can actually do that in an inspector. So I hope it actually is very helpful to you guys if you wanted to do quick math. All right, so the next thing that I didn't know at first is that resources are shared between objects in here or between nodes. So let's say you wanted to, let's create an area here real quick, and with that you want to add a collision 2D in here, and here you create a resource for a shape. Let's just call it circle. So now if let's say I wanted to duplicate this area 2D here, and I'll just move it a little bit to the right. If I were to update its radius, let's say I wanted to put it to 5, they both change. But why is it changing, guys? Why is it changing for both of them? And that's because they're sharing the same resource shape. You got to make sure, you got to be careful unless you know this is what you want. But if you didn't want that to happen, or you got to do either 2 ways. You either can right click, you can make it unique, and after that now the other one only changes, or you can just easily just clear it and then just create a new shape out of that, and that will work as well. So just keeping that in mind when you're doing resources. That can be anything when it comes to resources, or if you're using UI, it also creates like for fonts and all of that. They all use resources and they can be shared if you're actually duplicating the same node. So keep that in mind when you're building your project. All right, so the next thing I wanted to talk to you guys is about the at tool variable, this thing that goes on top, the at tool. And what this does is basically makes the script to work while you're in editor. You'll know if it's an editor script that has a tool if it's blue, right? So if you see this down here below, this one's white and this one's blue, and blue indicates that it has this at tool at the top, which indicates that you're able to manipulate and while you're in editor. Well, this doesn't work in C++ because there's no way to put an at tool anywhere in C++. But one way I was able to make it work with my procedural generation was to be able to call the call function. Is able to call a function with a name on it, with some parameters if it has any parameters, and it's able to call it and generate function if it has a method that has the same name, and it will find it if it does, and it will call it. And you can do that in C++. If this node that has a script is part of a C++ class, which is this chunk tile map that I have here. It is a C++ class. You notice I call the generate function here. So if I jump into my C++, this is my generate function here that I'm calling. In order for that to work, you got to make sure that you bind the method in the bind methods function. You're able to bind that function. So Godot knows that there's a function called generate. And that's the one way you're able to do to be able to call functions from GDScript to C++ and vice versa, right? And that's what it's doing. It's calling this function. And after it generates, it calls the function generate complete, which then gets called back to GDScript and tells me like, hey, generation is complete. So that's what basically it's doing. And that's actually pretty cool. So if you didn't know that, and you know, this is something, hopefully that's something you learned today, that you're able to call function C++ while in the editor, and it still works. Yeah, that's basically what I want to mention about the tool script. The next thing that I want to talk to you guys in here is the debugging and how it works in Godot using C++. If you were to go to a debugger down below here, right next to the output tab, you can notice all of this stuff that's in here, which is similar to how Unity does it. Is very similar. Just Unity has a better visual representation on this. In here is you just have multiple tabs, which just tells you the stack trace. If you were debugging, putting breakpoints on your scripts, right? So if you put a breakpoint, it will tell you the stack trace and where it actually is getting called from. You get any errors that you get here. You get the profiler and see how your code is doing and all of that. Once the game is running, you can start it, and then you can start seeing all the stuff that's happening in your game. And then Limbo AI. Limbo has actually a pretty awesome thing if you're using the Limbo AI for your NPCs or enemies and all of that. It gives you a really cool visual representation of how the logic of the AI is doing per NPC or enemy that you have in your game. And that's basically it for the debugger part. But for me, what I wanted to bring up, what do I do when the game crashes, especially when it comes to C++, right? Because C++ is, you know, if you use C++ before and it crashes and all of that, there's times where it doesn't actually tell you exactly why, you know, and it kind of sucks. I can give you an example. I'm gonna purposely make it crash, so give me a second. But honestly, I haven't really gotten a lot of crashes here where it doesn't really tell me what it is. For a majority of the part, it actually tells me where exactly is the issue, or at least somewhat the issue. So it hasn't been too bad. So let me get in the game. If this is your first time being here, this is the game that I'm working on called Edenville, and it actually did crash. So like I said, I purposely made it crash. So you got these two options. So you can close it if you want, if you want to find this on your own, or if you want to try to use a debugger, you can go to the debug option. This window will pop up. It'll give you different ways to open your Visual Studios. I got this option here, which is my current Visual Studio Community 2022 that I'm using right now. So if I clicked on that one and press OK, Visual Studio will pop up to the front and it will tell you, hey, it crashed. It'll tell you there's a little line here and it says that, hey, there's an exception here. So the issue here, usually when it comes to crashes and debugs, the line that it hits right here is not usually the line where it crashed at. It's always the line before it. For me, it's line 39. Even though it says 41, but it's always the line before it, which is line 39 for me. And the issue here is because this is not initialized correctly. Exception thrown, access violation, right in location. That kind of is telling you like, hey, you're calling a function from a variable that hasn't been initialized. And in my case, it's character controller. You can actually hover over it and it will tell you, hey, it's null. And you can basically, you know, you can tell usually for the majority of the part, you can tell you exactly where the issue's at. And you can be like, oh, hey, this is not initialized, right? So solutions for me, figure out crashes where it doesn't actually tell you all the information. I can give you some tips on that. And this doesn't only just work for Godot, but it works for all of the different game engines that you're going to be working on because it's very universal. Because I know crashes can suck, especially when it doesn't tell you exactly what the issue is. And this is not in any particular order. It depends on how you actually want to do it. I can give you 3, and one of them, you actually can do it in any particular order, but usually I will leave it at the end. One is to put a lot of debug logs everywhere in your code when the issue is happening, so you can pinpoint where the issue is actually occurring. So when you're playing the game, you try to figure out the crashing and replicate the problem. And then you try to figure out, okay, so this crashes at this point. So you try to find that point in your code and you start putting a lot of error logs until you start figuring out where the issue is happening. So that's one way. It's pretty slow, but it does work. The other one is version control. Version control is your brand. So in my case, I'm using GitHub. GitHub is actually pretty awesome and great. And it tells you the differences that you made before from the previous commit that you made, either if it's local or remote. It will tell you the differences between the two different files, and you can actually see what the issue is going to be. And in my case, this is the issue here. GitHub is actually your friend. So every time you're working on milestones, you should always commit. You don't have to push it to remote at all. You can just do it locally if you want, especially if you're working on projects at work or anything like that. You can always commit it locally. Just don't push it to remote. And every time you're working on milestones or bugs, each of those things should always have smaller steps to implement that new feature. That's what you're doing. Each feature should have smaller steps, and each time you complete a smaller step, you should always commit, at least try to, but because that is definitely helpful when it comes to debugging. Because if it comes to a crash or anything, you can actually go back here and start looking at your previous commit and try to compare it to other code and see why this is happening, and you can pinpoint where the issue is located. That's a solution that definitely is very helpful, and you can actually change your current branch to other branches or to previous commits. And then you can start figuring out, is this crash happening at this commit? Is this crash happening on this other commit? And you start figuring out where exactly that issue is going to be at. So that's for version control. And the last point, which majority of the time is, for me, you always do it at the end, just because it's more time consuming. And that is commenting out your code. Like I mentioned before, you start pinpointing where exactly the issue is crashing at when you're playing the game. You try reproducing it. And then once you figure out that this is happening at this situation, you try to find it somewhere around your code where this is actually happening, and you start commenting out all your code, and you eventually come to a point where it won't crash anymore, and basically you can then start figuring out what the crash is happening. So that's possibly 3 points that I can do when it comes to debugging, and that's basically it. The next thing I wanted to jump in is about documentation here in Godot and how I use it when it comes to GDExtension, C++. So this is the documentation website. It tells you all the stuff here about Godot, how to get started, the class references. So it tells you all the variables and the functions and the nodes and everything that's in here, which is great. But it's also very minimal. I just wish it was a little bit more. I wish they would clarify a little bit more when it comes to this variable. So it's not super great, but it is in here, and it gives you like a brief description about what this function does and all of that kind of stuff in here, right? But when it comes to GDExtension, C++, there isn't that much stuff in here actually. So right now, this is what GDExtension is. It tells you what it is, and it gives you an example of how to build the project in C++. So if you ever wanted to do that, it's in here and in their documentation. It tells you what the directory should look like to clone the repo, and where every time you're creating new files and updating your code, it tells you how to build the project in order for Godot to know about it. But basically, that's about it. It doesn't provide any other information about other things that I wish it was included in here. It does give you information on how to export variables and how to create signals and all of that. But besides that, there's a lot of stuff that you can do in GDScript that you cannot do in C++, and that you will have to find a different way how to be able to do something similar to how GDScript works. And I wish it was in here as a documentation, but it's not. You just have to figure it out for yourself. And you have to do some research or look into the code and all of that. So that's basically what I did when it comes to C++. I learned how to do stuff by digging into the C++ files of Godot and seeing what they have in there, and see if there's something similar to how it works in GDScript, but not all the time it works that way. Like when you're doing in GDScript, you could do like preload and all of that stuff, but you cannot do that in C++. So you have to figure out a different way on how to do that. So, and if that doesn't work, maybe do some Google search and see if somebody else is dealing with it. That's basically about the documentation for C++. And I just hope that it gets better over time and things get documented a little bit better. That's basically about it for documentation. All right, so the next thing I wanted to jump on is just tutorial when it comes to Godot. When it comes to Unity, there's a plethora amount of tutorials out there, which is great, which is why Unity is a great engine to work on when it comes to as a beginner, because there's so many tutorials you can jump into, a lot of stuff that you can start creating simple projects, right? and he's starting to understand how coding works in C Sharp. In Godot, there is tutorials in here, but it's not as crazy as Unity. But there are tutorials there where you can start as a beginner as well, and you can start creating your own projects pretty easily. So it's just like me, as I was working in Godot for the first time, I did look at tutorials and all of that, such as on Just Codes. I did look at her tutorials when it comes to water shader and all that, and water trails and all of that for my project. So I thank you, Just Codes, for your shader tutorials and all of that. It's very informative. GD Quest for other tutorials. I mostly looked into procedural generation, especially when it came to dungeons. I looked at the tutorials on how they create their dungeon generations or how to create rooms, right? I was able to get inspired on how to create my own version of it when it came to my indie game. So GD Quest was a helpful channel to look for. Another one was called Hexflix University. I learned how to use Limbo AI. It gave me more information about it and how to start project and start using Limbo AI for my NPCs, and also Dialogic. They have a great tutorial here when it comes to how to use Dialogic in your project if you want to use dialogues and all of that kind of stuff. So these are some tutorials channels that I looked at. I'm pretty sure there's other ones that are slipping my mind right now, but there are tutorials out there, which is great. So if you're a beginner, it shouldn't be a problem for you to get started. The next thing I wanted to talk to you guys about is exporting your game here in Godot compared to Unity. It comes with the ability to be able to export to different places, to PC, to WebGL, iOS, Android, to Xbox, to PlayStation, to Nintendo, and it does it for you already, so you don't need to do anything with that. But when it comes to Godot, so if I were to go to my export, you can add it here. And the only places you're able to export are these things here. So you can export to Android, to iOS, which I've done before. So if you have not seen my videos on how I export my project to iOS, I have a video on that, and I show you how I export to iOS. So if you're interested in that, feel free to go to my shorts or my videos. You can export to Linux, Mac, WebGL, and to PC. And that's basically it when it comes to exporting to other stuff that is not in here, such as Xbox or PlayStation or Nintendo. You will have to do extra work with that, and you will probably most likely you will have to contact them that you want to export your game to their platform. And that's basically it about exporting game builds. For this next part, things I wish Godot had, and it's actually just one item that I have here, and most likely it will change over time as I keep working on this and find new things that I want to have. But this is what is happening right now that I'm thinking at this very moment, and that is having like similar to an asset store, right? So you do have this asset lib here where it gives you all the different options that Godot is able to have add-ons into your project. So people that have created plugins for the Godot, everything's going to be in here, and you can look through all of the stuff that's in here, which is great. So it gives you this little tab and tells you what exactly this is doing, and which is kind of similar to how the asset works, right? When you look into assets and see how that actually works. So you do have that option, but the problem here is I wish you were able to have a store here where you're able to, like, let's say I created a plugin and I wanted to sell it. I don't have that option here. Feel free to let me know in the comments. I have not seen it. Maybe there is a website for it and you're able to add it that way. Maybe you can do that in like itch.io. You can create your files there and sell them there, but I wish it was implemented through Godot. Yeah, you can create your own plugins and be able to, put it here in the asset library, which is great. But if I wanted to sell something, I cannot do that here within Godot. Basically it for things I wish I had. I may have more things in the future, and something that I can put out in future videos if you guys are interested in seeing more of this stuff in here in this channel. So in conclusion, I actually really like Godot for the current state that it's in. It's very flexible. I really love how simple it is and how fast it is when it comes to building stuff and exporting your games. It's super fast and really awesome. And I really like the fact that you're able to contribute to this project and be able to interact and talk to the community here in Godot and be able to receive a pretty simple, fast response. Love the fact of how friendly it is to use and how quickly you can get into making games in this engine. And that's basically why I want to keep using it. So I'll probably end up keep using this and using it in the future, and and see how that actually ends up being. I also love Unity, so don't get me wrong, I really love Unity, and I may end up swapping back and forth just because I want to keep myself up to date when it comes to Unity as well. And also there's still so much stuff the Godot has that I have not touched. I have not touched XR just yet. I've not touched 3D in here just yet. I did hear 3D may have issues compared to 2D, but feel free to let me know if those problems are still there when it comes to 3D, because if it's the problems are still there, I'll probably end up using Unity. But yeah, that's basically the conclusion here. So I'll just keep it going, guys. I want to hear about you guys. Now, what are your thoughts on Godot? Have you guys have any issues with it? Do you guys like it? Are you a beginner, or are you a seasoned developer that have used Godot for a while? I'd love to know your thoughts on Godot and your experience on it, either if you're a beginner or not. And feel free to let me know in the comments. Do you guys have any feedback on this video? This is the first time making this video on here on this channel. Feel free to, if you have any feedback, maybe you saw something here where you're like, hey, you can improve upon this problem at this time that you were talking about it, and you can use this instead, or there's other things that you can do that can make it easier for you. Feel free to let me know. I love that. Maybe I said something wrong in the video, so feel free to correct me if I said anything wrong, and definitely will love to correct myself and gain knowledge. You know, we're all learning here, we're all doing stuff here, so just don't be mean about it. But yeah, I'm open to feedback here when it comes to these videos. And basically, I would love to know, what are your favorite creators? I know I mentioned a couple here earlier, and I have other ones that I just slipped out of my mind and I can't think of it just yet, but feel free to let me know in the comments. What are your favorite creators, and like what kind of projects are out there that deserve some attention, because I would really love to know. There's a lot of cool stuff that's happening that sometimes it hasn't passed into my eyes just yet, or into other people's eyes just yet, and I would love to bring some attention to those as well. And basically, finally, the final question: what are you guys working on? I'd love to know what you guys are working on and see what you guys are doing. Either if it's in Godot or in Unity, Unreal, Game Maker, Scratch, doesn't really matter. I'd love to know what you guys working on. And that's basically it. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. It was really a fun video to create. It was the first time I'm doing this kind of stuff, so it's kind of brand new to me. So hopefully I did an okay job here, but I would love to do this more in the future once I keep learning more about Godot. But yeah, if you really did enjoy this video, feel free to give it a like. It does help me out with the algorithm. And if you haven't subscribed and are interested in joining me on this journey with me and creating projects, working on my current indie game, making future games, creating videos like this that I just did just now, feel free to follow me. It does actually help me out, and I would love to know what I'm doing is actually something that you guys enjoy. And I would love to create a community here where we can enjoy stuff together and build stuff and all of that. So, and that's basically about it, guys. I'll see you guys in the next one. Most likely it'll be my development blog that I'm continuing with my current indie game, Edenville. So if you guys are interested in that, feel free to, also subscribe if you are not, and follow me on my indie game that I'm working on right now. I'll see you guys in the next one. Signing out.